Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, show number 511. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, Once again, we're still in the beautiful Netherlands, city township called Almere. On and off cloudy, sunny, was going to have more of the picturesque garden background, but with it so bright, I can't see my screen and my notes as we talk, so I had to kind of flip it back towards the building so that you get a chance to be able to see what I want to talk about, which today, topic wise, has come up in a variety of conversations for a variety of ways. First, as there's anything of these things, they come up in exposure as buzzwords. There's a terminology, an acronym that gets created, and then people toss it around, one to seem like they're more aware of things than other people that they're talking to. Then it turns out that there's things that get asked that they don't have an answer to, so they need to explore what it is that's being referred to. And it's about a progress of things that are happening. So rather than be vague, let me just jump into our topic today. And that is GEO versus SEO and you. It's an acronym that has begun to invade sounds negative. It's begun to become engaged with our dialogue when it comes to our strategies as to what we're doing. And since it's mostly paired with what SEO has traditionally done organically for us, GEO, which is generative engine optimization, okay? And this is for our wonderful world of AI bots and their search queries. Right now, actively just in ChatGPT alone, and we know there's a whole host of AIs that are out there. ChatGPT just happens to be the first one that and most familiar to most people. Has roughly 180 million daily users. No small number. There are by far dozens of AIs past all of that, all with their own variances as to what they do and sources as to whom's using them or created them. And all of those AIs are now going out and searching to give you the answer that you're using them for. And a lot of times, most of that comes from how we've structured what we do for search engine optimization. And real thing to consider between GEO and SEO is that there's a lot of similarities. There's things that just maintain the consistency of what it is that you have to do on a persistent basis. You need to have good keyword structure. You need to have good content. You have to have authenticity. Remember when our show, I think it was 505, we talked about EEAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. It was being used by Google and other search engines for highly qualified referral information such as medical and legal, where there is a authenticity requirement for it to be shown in results that go onto this premise of the experience related to the content, the expertise related to the content, the authoritativeness related to the content, and the trustworthiness related to the content. Those criteria create a internal algorithmic structure for Google and Bing and all other search engines to quantify the authenticity, accuracy, and usage of that link and relationships to show them up in search results. Now, SEO, we're very familiar with, or should be way familiar by this point, as the origins of our website structure of search is. We do a lot of link building. We do a lot of content development to a degree from a user perspective and optimization perspective. If you think about the time cycle of SEO, back in the days when repetitive keyword use was a tactic, when SEO engines were basing it on frequency of word usages and so forth. And then we went through the whole upgrades of Penguin and all these others with Google, where it talked about the intent of content. So to better understand the content by the intent of the search, the usages of the word combinations rather than just what word was being used, the usage of the word in a series of sentences for structure to know what the idea of what the user was looking for. All of this has been a progression of development of SEO. But now we have AI, and AI works on a completely different model. Think of it in contrast for another topic that we've discussed, and we're going to bring it back into another show here very soon. It used to be when you made an app, you had to make it, or a website, you had to make it according to the coding that you were given, the platform that you're building on, whether it was WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, whatever. And you had to use coding that says cell spacing and color palette selection and placement and pixel count and frame sizes and a source of image pull and all these other things that go on with it. And now with AI, you can go and through semantic conversation Tell it what you want, and it will take care of what it takes to build it for you. It knows in order to build a page that you've described or a website to respond to what you've asked for it, that it's will build what the coding that it needs. It'll know that if it's building a WordPress-based platform function to it, that it's going to go over and use whatever coding is necessary that it knows, okay, um, Linux or whatever, to build what it has been asked to do. You don't have to actually worry about building it yourself with code. Well, that influence on AI for coding is also AI's influence on search and discovery. Think about search engines and what they do. You describe what you're looking for as accurately as you think you need to get the best results. We've learned and conditioned from search results that if you can be very specific about things and then about what it is that you're interested in that specificity, you have better results. But the results are still options. And yes, they're cascaded according to prioritizations that the search engines have created. They put more of their content up. They want to put more, like Google wants to put more of Google results, maybe Google Maps stuff, Google Meta Search, Google answer boxes, what I call still affectionately Google Zero, where it tries to say, okay, based on what you're asking, here's what we think is the best answer, but also other variations to questions that might be related to what you're looking for, that little Google box. And then it gets into the paid section of what people and businesses and yourself pay to be present on and as soon as possible in front of the user so that they can click on what you're saying is what you want them to know. And your competitors trying to do the same thing. And then it gets into the organic results as to what organically has this authenticity, this expertise, and trustworthiness to show up well in organic searches. AI is looking to give you a more singular answer. It's not trying to show you variations of choices that you still have to progress through. It's trying to answer or give you information specific to what you asked it to do. Your framing of what you're asking is different for any of you that are using, and obviously 180 million plus per day are, as to AI, you ask the question differently of AI. It's conversationally, hey, I want to know about X, Y, and Z with this, whatever. And AI understands what you're asking, and then AI goes to find you the answer or the information that you've asked for. Not in variations, not in cascading prioritizations, not in prioritizations of what people have paid for versus what people haven't paid for, but conclusively information that answers it. The caveat to that is we also know that because AI will answer a question, it sometimes may generate the data that it wants to answer your question for you. So there's worry about authenticity, accuracy, trustworthiness, and expertise that you have to worry about. To that end, GEO, generative engine optimization, has variances compared to SEO, search engine optimization. One of the biggest ones is content versus context, keywords and links compared to authenticity and references. So when you think of what a GEO, where you're optimizing for generative, is that you need to validate your content. Now, we, for SEO, would say, well, here's backlinking. Here's links to other sources of data that is related to our sources of data, and that the SEO, the search engine, will validate our authenticity because we're showing our connectivity to other sources of relevant authoritative data. That's good. That's not what generative does, though. Generative goes in and says, what did you say? Who did you say said it? Where did you get it from? And how accurate is what you're getting it from what was actually done? It checks that depth. And from that, it determines the priority of what you said versus anybody else that it found that's in similarity to getting the answer that's been asked of it. And it will assign through that comparison which one is the most authoritative, which one is the most experienced, expertise, and trustworthy of what it can determine based on how the content was presented, from who the content was sourced, and the reference of that sourcing. And it'll use that content to craft whatever response is necessary to the query of the user. That's a different way of how we've been using our content. Now, for those that always look at their websites as user-first experiences, which is what we have been advocating and advocating and advocating, and any good SEO person will always tell you build first for the user, build second for the engine. You want the user experience to be good. But here's where we've learned over the past 20 years, and more importantly, the past 10, is that in order to get in front of people to even have that opportunity, you first have to go through the gateway of being discovered, authenticated, and presented. At that point, the user experience of the content is valuable because without people finding you, you could have really good user engagement, layouts, content, verbiage, what have you. But you don't have anybody knowing it's there because nobody can find it. So you have to address what SEO does for optimizing its placement in search engines for you, which is a familiar territory, as we've said, and what also GEO now does for you in the aggregation of what you're presenting as content and how it may or may not decide to use it relative to what you're wanting to make sure people discover about you. That difference of tactic is the critical difference that you have to consider with GEO right now. Now, to say it's a race, sure. The faster you can begin to modify what you're doing for just not SEO, but now GEO, is as important as deciding when do you think you want the business that's coming through with these searches. Now, there's a lot of technical things about GEO that you also need to make sure of. You need to make sure that the GEO bots, the ones that are out looking and discovering and so forth, are fully open and accessible to what you have. And there's formatting requirements in the sense of how they look at your content, what you're telling them to look at, and what priority you put your content at as to which pages are cascaded above others. There's a formatting associated with your site. Think of it as main folder, subfolders, sub-subfolders, etc. You prioritize what data is applicable to what content it's connected to. There's a technicality to that. That's a function that you have to designate so that the bots see your content in the prioritization or authority that you express it to be so that it can be used for what you have it for. I know it sounds overly redundant, but it truly is the ability to take what you've been doing for SEO, put a new paint job on it, change the engine a little bit so it can do dual fuel and send it back out again. That's really what you're doing. You're making sure you don't degrade your SEO, but you need to modify it for GEO. And GEO is really about making sure content is developed. This is where it gets important to understand the nuance because now you're dealing with more of an entity of understanding than it is a technology of step-by-step progressions. With SEO, it was very specific. It looked at things. This is how it looked at it. This is how it prioritized it. This is how it identified it. This is what it used it for. And this is how it was produced. GEO is more subjective because with AI, each AI has its own variation of what it does and how it does it, but there is consistency about content that will be for certain. So for when you're doing GEO, it's about creating content first and foremost, but more consistently, and this is the part that gets conceptually hard to understand if you don't remember marketing's voices. You have to phrase it and perceive it from a perception of consistency as to how you present the content. You refer to things from the same narrative that you would as a person, first person, third person, possessive, authoritative, casual. Your persistency of voice and the consistency of using that voice truly help use GEO value better, faster than diversifying how you present the data. It's as simple of having a page that might have a table of content versus a page that has narrative content. Those are different. GEO will look at them different. The content is usable. The narrative is inconsistent. Now, obviously, we have a variety of content that we present. Some things are more authoritative and factual. Other things are more soft and engaging. But it's when the voice of how you present them. Is it a casual representation of the data? Is it a more authoritative representation of the data? Then that has to be carried over into the narrative of the conceptual data. You keep the same voice for both, because if you start creating variances of voice, then the AIs will see it differently between a page of your site because they're only pulling data that they need. They're not doing an immediate look at your entire site to see where you are in its entirety. They're just looking for a specific resource that you're saying you have, and it's taking it on a voice that you need. And if it comes and it finds it in multiple locations, and those multiple locations within your site are different in how they're presented, it might diminish the authoritativeness that it awards you and not use your content in lieu of another site that may be more consistent in how it presented the data. This means that you have to think about what you are presenting for content. Some websites, they're very authoritative in their main tier stuff. This is our hotel. These are our amenities. These are, our hours of operation mapped to our description, very factual. And then they let their blog turn into this soft, marshmallowy, engaging dialogue as if they're talking to a close friend about casual things. For SEO, no real issue because they are only looking at keywords, structure, authentication, all those things. GEO, big difference. They don't know whether this information that's factual is more authoritative than your casual conversation, which is more explanative or more expanded. So they may create a negative relationship between those two and decide that neither is the most accurate, but another site which may have less of what, or maybe not even referring to you, might have a clearer picture of what it's looking for to give response to the user. That's where you run into the issue of not being consistent. You need to make sure that as you begin to apply content, and this is going to go very challenging for properties that for brands to the individual units and so forth, that each unit is going to have its own perspective as to how it wants to present itself. But cumulatively under, say, a singular brand or something, that turns into some confusion point. There has to be an SOP guideline as to this is the narrative corridor that we talk. We talk in this tone, in this voice, from this diminutive, and our content is always persistently maybe like a news article, most important, next most important, what's important after that, and, and substantive support items that below it. Maybe it's news narrative, maybe it's story narrative. Here's the predication, here's the introduction, here is the engagement, here is the resolution, here's the conclusion. That's a story narrative. So you have different ways you're going to approach content that you need to decide how you want to be persistent with it. Of course, each property is going to have its own narrative for what it represents, but a consistency of voice is important. Is it passive? Is it professional? Is it authoritative? Is it casual? Is it first person? Is it third person? That has to be a guideline that says this is how we approach it each and every time. This is how we talk to our guests from our brand perspective. If you're an individual property running for yourself and only yourself to worry about, choose these choices now because this is the starting point that's very hard to change. Say, for instance, you turn into first person narrative, and then 6 months from now, you decide, no, 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 I want to be third person authoritative. All the stuff that you just did for person narrative, literally for best benefit, has to be changed to your new narrative. That's a daunting task for if you're aggressively growing content, which you should be for GEO to really work. You need to make sure that you're constantly expanding your content, not reflavoring it. There's been some ways to try to think that you can spoof it by just saying the same thing in different tones. That's not good. It diminishes. That's why these parameters are in place for GEO is if you keep changing your voice, it diminishes your authority, which diminishes your usability. So changing what you say into different ways of saying it doesn't really help your GEO optimization, it takes it away. So you want to continue to stack content on top of each other, additional content to the origin content. So here's our events, but here's a specific event. Here's the specific event. Here's aspects of that specific event. Same voice, constant expansion of content. And that usually goes into a timeline closer to the event itself. When you talk about story arcs and timelines, you introduce the idea that this is happening, then you introduce the importance of what's happening at the event, then you introduce the things about the event that's important that you need to make sure you're considering, and then also what content is specific to what you want to connect to that content of why you're even presenting it. That progression timeline of content discovery is what GEO thrives on. So too does SEO, but GEO thrives on the content of it, not the specificity of links and functions of it, like SEO would for optimization usage, keywords, and what have you. Not that, again, keywords aren't being used by GEO, but it is not in the same context that it's being used for. It's only for content. So without trying to paint ourselves in persistent circles, The reality of it is that you need to consider GEO. You need to consider it now and decide right now the parameters that you want to work with under that follow the guidelines of what you consider to be your voice and your diminutive. When you do that, be persistent with it. You're not out to gut your SEO. You're not out to go over and not continue to prioritize SEO, but you do need to prioritize content development, and not in as much as about keyword usage within that content as it is value of content and the keywords associated with the content development. That's more of the GEO focus to this. I'll put some links to some really fascinating articles of people as people go and talk through their discovery of what they're doing for their own techniques. Some very good people in the industry that are right more on the forefront of making this work for individual entities and so forth. Plus, also those people that are working with AI and understanding how they're manipulating AI's usage and deriving better results with AI through this content development usage that GEO is so focused on, as to how it gets the answers that it gets and how each of these AI agents, the long language models and AIs are actually functioning in their own ecosphere as to what they do with the data that they discover and they search. But from a technical perspective, get those doors open for your AI bots. I would recommend doing it now, even if you don't feel like you have the transitional content. Let them at least see the content that you have, and then begin to expand on that content in an expanded volume way. You're like, great, I was having a hard time keeping up with blogs. Now I got to put all this other content. Yes, to a certain degree. Good part of it is you can use AI to help you generate content, given the specifics of finding sources of data that then you can exploit and expand more on what you want to say about it and put it again. This is the most important, humanize it. You need to make sure it's in your voice, in your diminutive, in your way of presenting the content persistently for your property. So, GEO versus SEO. There is a difference. It is important to do both. It is important to expand into the GEO ecosphere now and begin to make these changes to what you're doing, not at the expense of SEO, but in the inclusion of it as well. Thank you everyone for watching us live, as always, on our TV channel, the Hospitality Channel, and also on our simulcast, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. You can watch us, as I said, you can listen to us on Hospitality Radio, our radio station, and we will recast our show always 11:30 a.m. London time, Wednesday, for our EU friends, which is around because that's my time zone right here. But we do this for our Eastern time frames to be consistent. 5:30 is our local time that we do this, and it's actually 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. That's our standard show time, and then 11:30 a.m. Sydney Australian time for our APAC friends. We have our time zones. That being said, we still get wonderful people to go over and watch us live at all hours, and we sincerely appreciate that. If you have any questions about any of the things we've discussed today or any of our shows, you can reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I answer everything related to podcasts and live shows. If you want to see any of our previous shows and or listen to any of our previous podcasts for the past, well, we're coming up on our 11th year, but for 10 years now, every week we've been doing this, regardless where in the world we may be. You can go to hospitalitychannel.tv, and there you can look for a data broadcast, topic, and or a co-host that are associated with the show. And you can go back to the shows and watch it. Plus, we are about ready to launch our own AI. I'm trying to figure out whether I want it in my own voice or not. Maybe not. I don't know. But we're taking all of the transcripts of all of our shows, at first now just back to through 24, because we don't want old information that may taint the results of the AI's response to it. But you get to ask it any questions of anything that we've talked about and find out what we said we should do or could do or what we said about it. So it's our own AI interactive as to our own content, which has been kind of fun on how it comes through. I use Robert Cole's voice. Yeah. It's a nudge. No, I'll use something. Anyways, to that end, thank you all. My name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time and look forward to talking to you all next week.